This is the moment we've all been waiting for the thousands in attendance and the millions watching around the world. Let's get ready to
Welcome back to the Junkyard Pod. I'm Tony Pesta, joined by Jackson Flickinger, and today we have a fun little game of in or out. It's a pretty simple game. I think it's the first time we've played it this season, but basically how it works, we're going to read off a take, and then we'll decide whether or not we are in or out on said take. Before we get started, quickly, I want to remind everyone that if you aren't following us on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube, then please consider doing so. All the links are in the description, and it would really help us out. Now, I want to jump straight into this because I think we're all still trying to process last night's game against Houston. There's a lot that happened there. And so naturally, I think our first segment here, this is just kind of a gimmicky way for us to talk about what happened. In or out, Jackson, Darius Garland should be disqualified from winning Clutch Player of the Year after what just happened.
First, I want to say that the Clutch Player of the Year is a fake award, and it is a real award, but it is a pretty fake award. And it's mostly just based off of vibes. And if you were to base it just off vibes, it's hard to give to somebody who, missed free throws in that moment. So he would have to have a signature. I feel like it goes to people who have like very signature moments. So unless he had like a signature moment where he wins a couple games with a buzzer beater, I think it'd be hard to, grab the Clutch Player of the Year award. But, I don't want to be too harsh on Darius Garland, but also like, this is where I struggled with the grades on Fear the Sword. People were mad at me because
you gave him a pretty, I would say not generous, but I think you were fair because
I think it was fair. I gave him a C minus. Yeah, I gave him a C minus, and like I had people telling me he should have gotten an F. I had people telling me he should have gotten like a B plus, and it was like I could see both arguments because it's like they wouldn't have been in that spot if it wasn't for him, and also you got to make at least two.
I know. I mean, listen, he was probably the best player for the Cavs last night in a game, a tough game on the road that they only lost by one. If they lose that game in any other way, it probably is like a B or a B plus for Garland, but
or an A.
You got to give me 2 out of 3. Yeah, at least 2 out of 3. At least tie the game. That was painful.
Yeah, and it like also covers up that Donovan Mitchell was 0 for 6 in the fourth quarter with 0 points, and missed 2 game-winning go-ahead shots of his own.
Yeah.
We can complain about Alpi Sengun all we want, but Jarrett Allen did foul him there, and or at least they called the foul there. And if that doesn't happen, I don't think the Rockets are scoring in the half court in 4 seconds because that's I don't think they're going to do that. They don't have the they don't have the one player that you're really scared about. Like I know Fred VanVleet, but when you can,
Fred VanVleet was looking scary yesterday.
Well, when you can go in a man defense for 5 seconds, I think it'd be tough to get a shot off. So it's like there's a lot of other things to blame for this, but Darius Garland's the one that's going to make the headlines because it was right there. Makes the shots, Cavs win. He missed the shots, the Cavs lost.
Yeah, and I want to be clear. We did not lose the game because of the officials. Yes, I think the officiating was really questionable, almost on both sides to a degree, but we had our chance. You're at the line, a 90% free throw shooter. As many people have already pointed out, he missed 5 free throws in that game. It's the first time Darius Garland has missed 5 free throws in a game. He doesn't take that many free throws, but he's usually automatic. So, and I'm not taking any blame away from him, but it was those weird free throws too, where it's a technical free throw, so there's no one around him, and clearly our boy was rattled. I don't know what happened. He just both misses were in and out too. It's not like he overshot it by a lot or almost airballed it. They both went in or out. But yeah, listen, Clutch Player of the Year. Previously, until last night, he was one of the best clutch players in the NBA. He had basically been perfect. You kind of mentioned something that I think is really important when we talk about this award, because to be honest with you, I honestly haven't seen many people outside of Cavs Twitter naming him for that award. Like it's Trae Young, De'Aaron Fox. It's the guys who are hitting game-winning shots. Darius Garland hasn't hit a game-winning shot. He's just hit like we're up by 2. 15 seconds left, here's a dagger, or it's a tie game with 30 seconds left, here's a layup or something. He hasn't had like a buzzer beating shot, which it was always going to be tough for him to win the award, especially when the Cavs aren't playing many clutch games. But now he has a permanent stain on his clutch resume that I think he probably won't win the award after that.
Well, it was weird because he had the 3-pointer with about 2 minutes left. Felt like it was not a dagger, but like, okay, the Cavs are in the driver's seat now, they're going to win. And then shortly thereafter, he comes down and he turns it over on a pretty bad drive to the basket, or at least one that was really well covered. So it wasn't like the free throws were the only thing that was bad, but it's just kind of weird because like there was a really high moment, mixed in there as well. So, just a tough break. And that's kind of just, that's how basketball is sometimes.
Yeah. And that's why I was okay with the grade you gave him, because honestly, like I said, he probably was the best Cavalier in that game. I believe he shot 3 of 5 in the fourth quarter. He collapsed at the free throw line at the end, but throughout the game, I thought there were some mixed results. He was very aggressive getting to the paint. The shots didn't drop at the rate that they normally do, but he was still getting to his spots. And he was huge in that they went on a 19-0 run in the fourth quarter that nearly won them the game. And he was a big part of that. So,
I mean, so is Dean Wade.
Dean Wade too. Sam, even though
Obviously.
he didn't, I don't know if he scored, was providing a lot of space.
He had that little putback.
Yes, you're right. He had a putback layup. So, again, I think a lot of people, at least from what I saw on Cavs Twitter, are kind of unaware of how good this Houston Rockets team is. I don't think they're a championship contender, but they're second in the Western Conference. They're 15 games above 500, and it's almost February. So this is going to be a tough game on the road. The Cavs, again, like I said earlier, they lose it in any other way, you probably walk away from that feeling all right. But it was like the most heartbreaking defeat that we've had in a while.
Yeah, and it's also like the Cavs also had a really tough schedule leading up to it as well. Like it wasn't conducive. Like I know they just had a home game, but it was more of a road game because there was only one day at home. So they're just coming in and leaving again. So, it was, I'm trying to look at the schedule like really quickly right now.
Yeah, go ahead.
But Google's not, Google doesn't really work as good as it used to. But yeah, so the Cavs went on the road on January 14th, which was last Tuesday. They go to Indiana, go to Oklahoma City, go to Minnesota, come back home, and these are all like one day apart, and then you go back on the road to Houston and then back to Philadelphia. So it's like your pit stop in Cleveland was basically just another road game. So like this team has just constantly been on the road for a week and a half at this point. So it was a tough game for them coming into it, but I thought we had a lot of questions about how this offense would look against a physical defense like, Houston's after what they showed us last week against Oklahoma City. And I thought they did, pretty well. Like, I'm not going to say they did great. They had really good moments, but the first and fourth quarter, they were, really good. And without three rotation players.
It's a good point. And I'm going to hit on that in just a second, but we mentioned this throughout our Playback stream, which, by the way, if you're not following Fear the Sword on Playback, you can watch the games live with us. Last night's game, for as painful as it was also pretty entertaining. But we mentioned it as far as the offense goes. It really was kind of like a give and take battle between for 4 or 5 minute stretches throughout the entire game. It was like, all right, Houston's defense is locking up and we can't get anything. And now we're on a Cavalanche and Ty Jerome is breaking the defense down and Darius Garland's going. And it was like, it was a pretty good back and forth fight between two very solid teams. The thing that I want to mention here, quick tangent before we move to our second topic. We always talk about the Cavs are missing Evan Mobley and that's going to hurt their defense. Well, guess what? Now it hurts their offense too. We have gotten to the point where you need Evan Mobley for offense as well, which wasn't always the case before. And if you look at how the Cavs played last night, they were really reliant on the 3-point shot, and they could have used Mobley's interior presence on both ends of the floor, but especially in the clutch on offense when we saw multiple step back threes from Mitchell, Garland, these difficult perimeter shots from the Cavs where if Mobley's available and on the floor, you can probably rely on him at one point down the stretch to catch the ball on the elbow or catch on the roll and finish it around the rim. So it really hurt not having him there. Same with Okoro and Levert to different degrees.
Yeah, it really hurt the rebounding, I think, with Evan Mobley because the Cavs kind of had to go smaller and they didn't really have like Dean Wade is a good rebounder, but you would have liked to have Dean Wade and Evan Mobley out there in those situations. Also, Evan's somebody who can beat mismatches very well. Alpi, Sengun, and having somebody else you could throw on Sengun would have been super helpful, as he was, he was a problem throughout. So I think that's, it's a good point to bring up that, he would have helped the offense.
Yeah, I think this is honestly relevant for the next topic as well, which we're going to go ahead and transition here. Second statement, and I have some stats to set the stage for it, but in or out, are you worried about Donovan Mitchell's recent stretch of games? And so the stats that I have here, in the month of January, Mitchell, he's averaging 21 points on just 39% shooting from the floor. Not very good at all. If you look at last season, Mitchell had 11 total games in which he scored below 20 points. This season, if you just count from December to now, he's matched that with 11 games below 20 points. So, Jackson, do you think there's anything to be worried about here, or what's going on with Mitchell?
I don't know. It's kind of weird. One of the things that if you look at his numbers, his finishing around the rim is really down. Spencer Davies asked Kenny Atkinson about this before the game on whatever the last home game was. So before the Suns game on Monday. And Kenny kind of talked about how he doesn't see anything physically wrong with Donovan in those positions. But he says that finishing at the rim comes down to a lot of reading the defense well and understanding when you should attack and when you should kind of pull out or when you should dump it off. And that could be where I think some of the issues come from. I don't think that he's lost a burst of speed or anything, but he's just not finishing at the rim as well. And when you're not finishing at the rim as well, he's overly reliant on his 3-point shot, which is going to come and go.
Yeah. And I pulled the stats there too, because you mentioned it. It's weird. It's just a weird, couple months for Mitchell here, because he's shooting a career best from the 3-point line right now, but his finishing at the rim has really dipped. He shot 70% within 3 feet last season. It's down to 57% this year. And what's interesting about that is I pulled the tracking data on NBA.com, which I don't know how accurate that is, but as far as his drives to the hoop, he's actually shooting the same exact percentage as last year, pretty much. He's shooting 50%. They're scoring on about 60% of his drives, which is the same exact number as last year. So I don't know where that dip is coming from near the rim. It's a weird thing that I can't explain. To me, my eye test doesn't tell me that he's lost any burst. I think he's looks just as athletic as he's always been. So I don't really know why the percentage down there has changed so much. I think it's going to normalize somewhat. But it'll be a down season from inside the paint. We're halfway through and it's this low. It's not going to shoot that high back up, but I don't think he's lost his ability to get to the rim or finish over opponents.
Well, one thing that's weird is that, looking at his rim numbers, it's the lowest it's been throughout his entire career. The only time he was the same level was 2021 with the Jazz. Which was his second to last year there. But one thing is interesting is that his short mid-range shots, so those little floater areas, he's actually hitting those at a 48% clip, which is in the 76th percentile.
Yeah.
So, and that was the opposite last year. So it's just, it feels like when he gets the space there, he's finishing, but it's almost, I think it could be decision making. Some of the times he's going up at the rim, you're just kind of what is he trying to do here? So I don't know. It doesn't make sense because the Cavs have better spacing principles. They're doing a better job of not being overly crowded in the paint when people are driving. This is seen in, Darius Garland's leap as a facilitator, especially out to the corners and stuff. I think is a lot to do with how the Cavs are much more principled in their spacing and offensive flow. So it just doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, and one thing, question that I have with all of this is how much of this is Mitchell, it's him just trying to take a back seat and allowing Darius Garland and Evan Mobley to flourish? When you look at his per game numbers being down, because we've talked all season about this is a career best year for Mobley and Garland, and Mobley has done blank random stats so many times this season, way more than previous years, and Darius is doing this more than often compared to previous seasons. That doesn't happen if Mitchell is scoring 30 points a game like he normally does. So he's clearly I think he's done a very good job of just being that selfless leader and allowing other players to step up and fill some of the spotlight. And I think maybe to a degree, some of the weird percentages and the weird moments that we've seen is him still searching for when it's Donovan Mitchell time. There's been moments where he's been pressing And I think maybe there's a little bit of a balancing act still going on. Clearly, I would say passing with flying colors all around because the Cavs are on a 65, 70 win pace. But there's maybe still some polishing there for Mitchell as far as his decision making. And the other thing that I want to point out, just because specifically the last few weeks of basketball, if you just look at his box scores, he had 8 points against Oklahoma City, 36 against Minnesota, 33 against the Suns, and then 19 against Houston. And so when you look at that, well, Lou Dort on OKC is a pretty phenomenal defender, and Amen Thompson's maybe even better. Like, he's also an amazing defender. So Mitchell struggling against two of the best perimeter defenders in the league. It's not that surprising. And just as important, he did torch Minnesota, who they have plenty of great perimeter defenders. For all the problems they've had this year, they're 7th best in the NBA in defensive rating. That's even better than Cleveland. So clearly Mitchell can overcome and beat an elite perimeter defense, but yeah, I mean, it's going to get the best of him sometimes, especially when, as I mentioned earlier, like Mobley wasn't very good in that OKC game, the second one. Same with Allen. Mobley hasn't been available the last few games. So against Houston, like maybe it's a little easier for Mitchell if he has a release valve getting to the rim and can dump it off to Mobley, or Mobley just takes some of the responsibility off his shoulders there.
I do think there is kind of a weird balancing act there that I think Mitchell's trying to kind of find his place in, which is kind of weird to say because it's not like his usage is really low or anything. It's more so that his minutes are lower. But he mentioned after the Suns game that he wasn't happy with like his performance. And you know how I always love asking, bad questions or, tough questions maybe. So I was just kind of like, what did you not like about your game and stuff? And he basically just said his decision making wasn't when he was taking his shots wasn't something that he liked. So I think that's kind of that may be some of the issue where he's trying to take a backseat, but then when it's oh, this is a lineup where I can take my shots, maybe he's forcing it a little too much. So I don't know. It's kind of, I think kind of that last play, the second to last play when he took the step back 3-pointer with 5 seconds left, was that the best shot he could have taken? Probably not. Could they have done something better there? Did he force that? It wasn't you're always okay with Mitchell, your best offensive player, taking a shot that he's very good at, but on a night when he doesn't really have it, would you rather have done something else? So it's, that could be an example of him forcing it. And I feel like that's kind of what we've seen throughout this stretch here, especially that OKC game, that the second one. I felt like he was really trying to get himself going with some tough mid-range shots. And it's dude, that's not really within the flow of the offense. So, I think there's a lot of things going into this and where he does deserve credit for taking a backseat. And I think that's a very real thing, but also it may have taken him out of his flow a little bit. And sometimes he's just trying to push it a little too much. So,
yeah, I think that's a great point to kind of round this off and hit on that too. I think there's probably a little bit of a connection between the games that the Cavs, the rare games where they have lost or the games where it's been competitive. I think we've seen Mitchell press at moments a little bit more in those games like OKC or even this Houston game. And it's probably a little bit of a remnant of the last few years or really his whole career where if the team was in the mud on offense, it's Donovan Mitchell's time to drag them out of it. And, even at his best, even when he was averaging 30 a game or close to 30, we did have games where he tried to pull us out of a hole and he wasn't able to do it because he's only human at the end of the day. And so maybe we're seeing a little bit of that. Overall, though, I'm not worried about Donovan Mitchell. I still feel pretty good about him being on this Cavs team. So I don't think his athleticism has declined. I think there's a lot of factors. It's a little bit of weird. It's hard to explain, but I'm not worried.
Yeah, that's fair. And one thing real quick, he has done it before, this year, that Celtics game that the Cavs won. He pulled them out of an 11-point hole, was amazing in the fourth quarter. So it's not and Darius had big moments too. So it wasn't like he was just doing it all himself. So we've seen him play well in that style and the Cavs have benefited from it most nights.
Yeah, and I mean, like I just said, if you just look at this week, he had 36 against Minnesota, a very good defensive team. It's easy to focus on the negatives and look at the OKC game or the Houston game, but listen, we know who Donovan Mitchell is at this point. There have been teams with length and athleticism that can give him some problems, but we also know he's capable. He's one of the best scorers in the NBA. So there's going to be a little bit of ups and downs whenever you have a guard as your best player. It's harder to overcome some of those issues, but Donovan Mitchell, he's a special talent. I think I think we're just fine with Spida.
Yeah.
All right, moving to our final topic here, and I'll be honest, I framed this question in a little bit of a goofy way, but I think it's worth framing it this way for our discussion. In or out, the Cavs need to trade for Cam Johnson. Jackson, do you think they need him, or where do you stand on this? I know you're high on Cam.
I think they need him. So I think that if you're they have shown to be a championship level team this year. Also, the league around them, I don't think the league around them is particularly strong. I think the Celtics have taken a step back this year, which is pretty typical after championships. So I expect the Celtics to be a good team. I actually expect them to be a better team next year once the championship hangover is over. You know, I've said this a million times. There's only the 2019 KD Warriors are the last team to make it out of the second round of the playoffs since winning a championship. And, you know, the Celtics may break that this year and go to the conference finals. But I think, you know, the door is more open than ever that you could beat the Celtics team. And I think the Cavs need to take that. And, you know, I know that there are, you know, some people are like, well, Cam Johnson's not the best defender in the world. Maybe that's fine. The Cavs need more scoring options, and they particularly need more self-creation, especially from somebody who's of his size, because the Cavs kind of get in this. The Cavs are kind of unbalanced in a lot of ways, where you have the really, you know, we talked about it before, you know, especially like in the summer, where you have the really small backcourt and a really big front court, and then you kind of have the disadvantages of both in the wrong matchup. Like even that second OKC game, you felt like you got the disadvantages of both. Having somebody like Cam Johnson kind of connects that all together, where it's like he can be a self-creator, he can get the bigs involved, he can play off ball. You know, maybe his defense is a little overblown, but I think that they have other defensive options. You can also, you know, he also gives you a versatility, he allows you to go smaller with like a Wade and Johnson and Mobley as your front court. So I think with the amount of things that he could provide for this team, I think it's worth going all in for. But I think this is, I don't want to step on your take, but the Cavs ceiling still does depend on Evan Mobley no matter what and how he fits into all of this. So I think a Cam Johnson move it's not like they can't win without Cam Johnson. It's more so I think they have a larger margin of error.
And yeah, I actually agree with that entirely. I won't say I'm in on them needing him, but I'll talk about Cam Johnson and what he brings to this team in a second. Before I forget, I wanted to mention his defense, because I have seen that people saying that he's washed up on defense or whatever. Listen,
yeah,
he's playing on the Brooklyn Nets. Okay, like it's hard to tell how good of a defender he is individually at this point. And to me, he's perfectly fine on defense. Is he Dean Wade? No, he's gonna be fine if you plug him into this Cavs team. Yeah, they already have a Dean Wade. They don't need another Dean Wade.
I mean, they do need another Dean Wade, but there's only one.
We could take more. we would accept more. But anyways, the point is, like, Cam Johnson's not going to be a liability on defense. That he'll be just fine on this team. And so really, he fits this team perfectly. I mean, any context, any lineup you put him in, the 3-point shooting, he's a good enough ball handler that he can create a little bit for himself. He can create for others. He's a great catch and shoot player, great moving without the ball. Doesn't need the ball in his hands, which is huge. Like, he could just basically be out there, and when you find him, he's going to knock it down. I think you mentioned it on the playback streams. He's in the 100th percentile for points per shot attempt, right? Like, that's good. He's an efficient player. He's 6'8". We've been wanting a wing for a while. To me, I think Cam Johnson's the best rumored trade target that the Cavs have had in the last 3 years. Like, this is the best option that we've had, in all honesty. And so I am absolutely willing to sell some of our depth for that, especially like if you start talking about, you know, like one rotational piece and then some of the handful of guys who are on the fringe. Like if it's a 3-for-1 deal, that's Okoro, Niang, and Tyson plus our first round pick, I think the Cavs, that's like a home run to me. They win that pretty easily, because yeah, Okoro's probably going to be in your playoff rotation, but it's, you know, it's a little shaky sometimes with his 3-point shooting. Niang, probably not really the most reliable guy in the playoffs. Tyson, it's his rookie season. Maybe that'll come back to bite you if he has a breakout at some point in the future, but you're basically giving up one rotational guy to get a starter. Like Cam Johnson would start for this team.
Yeah.
And even if you went as far as including LeVert in there, like, yeah, you lose your 6th man. That hurts. Ty Jerome, you'd be relying on him a little bit, but you're basically trading your 6th man for a starting caliber player who fits your biggest need. So I'm kind of, if you can get Cam Johnson for that price, I'm in on it. The last caveat here is
one thing I want to say about that real quick is that it gives you insurance, because I think the game against the Rockets was a good example of like a bad Max Strus. Like the Cavs could have used a really good Max Strus game. And like we've seen throughout, the playoffs and stuff with Max Strus, that like when you get a good Max Strus game, it's like, oh, this is great. But then like he's not somebody who he's really streaky with his shot. And I think that he's more reliant on that. At least right now he is. So it's like
he's not getting to the rim very well.
Right. So it's like I don't, he didn't even play in the fourth quarter last night. Kenny chose to close with Merrill and then Jerome after. So it's like, you need some insurance in that position. You can't just count on like Strus, and I don't think you can count, Merrill's my guy, but I don't know if you can count on him in every playoff series. So it's like you need those wing secondary scoring options and stuff. And like, with Merrill, the problem is you can't play him with Garland and Mitchell. You could play Strus, Johnson, and Wade and go really small. Like there's just a lot of things that you can do, and there's not, you look at the past champions, you have like the Nuggets with like KCP. They all have these wing type connective players that really just make everything work. So I would say the Celtics, but everybody's a wing. So.
Everyone's a wing connected player. But yeah, and on that point too, like you're kind of hitting on it. Like the Cavs, I've been saying this for a little while, at least a year. They just have a lot of streaky, kind of unreliable guys on their bench, which sounds really unfair because they literally have like the best bench in the NBA right now during the regular season. But again, playoff time, Max Strus, he's a streaky guy. If he gives you, if it's a 4-game series or 4 out of 7 where he's not shooting the ball well, that really hurts. LeVert, we know the Karis LeVert wheel, Niang, Okoro. Like there's a lot of variance with those guys. Cam Johnson, to me, not much variance. I feel pretty comfortable that he's going to be a steady, at worst, he's going to break even. Same like Dean Wade. Like Dean Wade, he's going to break even if he's not playing well. And I think there's value to having guys like that on your team when you're trying to win 16 games in the playoffs. So Cam Johnson, I absolutely think he's the best trade target that we've had in a while. The concern for me is I don't know if the Cavs can really afford him. I don't know if Brooklyn's going to accept it. And I know you're a little more bought into that. To me, I feel like the Cavs are either going to get outbid or the Nets are just going to stick to Cam Johnson, because I don't know if the package of Okoro, Niang, Tyson, and the 20, 30 round first round pick is going to be enough for it. But we'll have to see. That's something that, to be completely honest with you, this is just me sharing a completely worthless opinion because I don't know what their front office is thinking, but that's how I feel at least.
Yeah. So let me just explain why I think the Cavs have a better chance than you would look on like first glances. Johnson's making $22 million this year, I believe, which is a lot of money, and a lot of like this era of the NBA, especially like the new CBA. With the new CBA, it used to be like, hey, just plug guys in, we don't care. Now, like if you have matching salaries, just make it happen. Now with all the first apron, second apron stuff, teams are really cautious about that, and we're in a situation where like the teams that have the best players kind of suck. Like you look at the Nuggets, they're, they have the best player, but they're kind of in like a really weird spot where they can't really improve, and you're not sure how they're going to get out of the middle of the Western Conference. The same goes for Giannis. So you're in a weird spot, and like the teams that are winning are the teams that have like a lot of depth and flexibility. I don't want to say the Celtics have flexibility, but they have their core guys in there and locked up. So teams are really cautious about that. And if you're going to add somebody like Johnson's $22 million isn't like on its surface, it makes a lot of sense. Like he's worth that. But if you have a team like the Thunder, if they added him in, that would take away a lot of their flexibility when they have a lot of contracts coming up that they need to sign. So it's like, it makes it a lot tougher now than I would say like 4 years ago to go out and add somebody like that. And I think that's where, if Brooklyn could have traded him last summer, I think they would have. I don't think Brooklyn wants to go into next summer with trading him just based off of like it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense because at that point, he's only going to have 1 year left on his deal and he's going to have less value than I think he does now. So like, I think Brooklyn's just going to have to take whatever they get the best offer for this year. And if there aren't a lot of teams bidding, the Cavs offer looks pretty good.
Yeah, and to make the case for, I guess, the Cavs probably being the one team that's most incentivized to make this move, considering all the potential implications and limitations that come from making a trade like this, the Cavs are a team that already is pretty limited. Like they've maxed out with the core four. They have the majority of their supporting cast figured out. This is like they only have like one more move like this that they can make before being completely stuck. Cam Johnson, like I said, it's the safest guy that you could possibly make that move for. Like, I didn't want to do it for Dorian Finney-Smith. I don't want to do it for Larry Nance Jr., whatever else. Like, Cam Johnson's a guy who's as safe as a bet as you can make. For other teams like OKC, who has this war chest of assets, they're probably, it's like, well, are we going to go in on Cam Johnson, who's very good, is very safe, but if we wait a year or two, like, who knows who could be available for OKC? Like, I'm not projecting any of this, but like maybe Giannis wants out of Milwaukee. Maybe like who knows? A star could be available. And for OKC, it's like, do we need to go in on Cam Johnson right now? It's a safe move. It makes us better, but we have all these assets. We don't want to limit ourselves before we know what's out there. So maybe the Cavs end up having the best offer, and maybe Brooklyn, like you said, is just ready to get off him because maybe there's not a better option coming in the summer. So it's going to be something interesting to keep an eye on.
And I think kind of a good parallel here is like the Jrue Holiday move, where like you already had your core and you even had like your ancillary pieces that really fit well with like Derek White and Al Horford and Kristaps. They already went out and got him, but they needed that like one more piece. And like, yeah, it's tough. It's going to really limit your flexibility, but like that's the exact guy they needed. So yeah. I think you can look at the Cavs in like the same exact way.
Same thing.
How long have we, they've needed a wing that can like do more than just shoot. And
since
shoot.
Colin Sexton was on the team, they've needed
this. I was going to say
for a long time.
Since 23 left. So it's they've needed it for a while, and they're going to keep needing it. Like, maybe you can always talk yourself into maybe Jalen Tyson turns into that type of player, which he's 6'6", not 6'8". But you could have, like, looking back now, if you said, I don't want to trade for Donovan Mitchell because Oshie Abaji, like maybe he can turn into that guy, and now that would look like really stupid if you said, well, the Cavs could have Donovan Mitchell, but they wanted him instead. And it's like, well, that's dumb. Like this, he's,
we like know that, who Cam Johnson is. We don't know if Jalen Tyson's ever going to get there. We know Cam Johnson's already what we need. I like Tyson too, but that's a risk when you are, and you mentioned this right at the top, which is also very important to keep in mind. The NBA is wide open right now. You have as good of a chance as anybody to win the championship, and we've seen it time and time again. There are so many teams that think their championship window is going to be open longer than it is. You have to strike while the iron's hot. The Cavs, to me, I'm all in for a Cam Johnson trade. Do I think they need it? I think they could still win the championship with this current team if they made no moves, but I think Cam Johnson, without debate in my mind, makes this team better. So the last thing that I want to mention before I forget, you kind of already shared it a little bit. You stepped on my take. No, I'm just kidding. All of this comes down to for the Cavs championship hopes. Whether
I said it, I stepped on your take. So I didn't even go all in on it. I was just, I actually wasn't even gonna go too deep onto that portion of my take until you mentioned it. And I was like, yeah, I'll share that too, because you know what? Sometimes I have good takes. So thank you for reminding me. I shared this on the Playback stream already. So again, if you aren't following us over there, you should, because you get extra Cavs takes, so many extra Cavs takes. But the take that I have here, and I think most people will agree, when we're talking about do the Cavs need Cam Johnson, what the Cavs need to win a championship is Evan Mobley being Evan Mobley, the Evan Mobley that we expected him to be when we drafted him. If Evan Mobley isn't dominating mismatches and abusing opposing wings who switch onto him, they're not winning a championship, even if Cam Johnson is everything that we think he can be. They need Evan Mobley to be that guy. Now, you mentioned this in response on the Playback stream, and it's a great point, and I agree. Cam Johnson lowers that margin for error, right? Like he gives you a little bit more room. If Mobley's 5% less dominant than we maybe expect him to be, Cam Johnson can help cover that. So again, it's all around a good move. But
But I see a lot of people who are worried about, well, the Cavs, they can't compete with Boston or these teams that have wings. It's their kryptonite. Listen, their response is Evan Mobley is going to eat those wings up in an ideal world. So that's what you need to happen, whether Cam Johnson's there or we're playing Max Strus or Dean Wade at the 3.
Yeah, and if Evan Mobley's not dominating those mismatches, guess what? The Cavs aren't going to win no matter what. So,
yeah,
unless they get 23 back. So,
hey, don't count it out. No, that's not going to happen. But all right, any last takes before we wrap up this episode?
No, that's all I have. I'm taked out.
He's taked out. All right, well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Junkyard Pod. Let us know in the comments if you are in or out on any of the topics we discussed today. Like I said at the top, make sure you're following on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. The links are in the description, and we really do appreciate your support. With all that being said, go Cavs.
I agree. Go Cavs. Brian, how come the NBA hasn't released the last 2-minute report yet? What are they hiding?